Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. I always enjoy speaking to audiences of younger students because those are the individuals who are really driving so much of the change, especially within our own organization. The notion that a government today can hold back change and deny human potential in order to protect their power is obsolete. It's obsolete in Europe, in Libya, in China, and even in North Korea. In recent years and throughout history, we have seen some governments that have been able to manage change and others that have not, and have continued to deny the basic freedoms of their people and have eventually been forced to change. And in many places where change seemed improbable, it very quickly shifted to becoming inevitable because of the collective power of the people. North Korea, however, is a country where change seems impossible. When we think of North Korea, we think of the high politics, mysterious dictators and nuclear weapons, security threats and provocations. This is where some of the biggest and most powerful countries in the world come head to head, all with strong interests and competing priorities. And in the middle is North Korea, the prototypical rogue state that has proven itself to be impervious to external pressures. There have been no solutions, but rather a continuous cycle between limited provocations and limited negotiations. It is the one place where the Cold War stalemate never ended. When we look at North Korea from this level of high politics, it's the same story over and over again, and the situation seems impossible. Over the past 6 decades, the North Korean government has created a ruthlessly efficient system of political control, ultimately to ensure its own survival. It is one of the most repressive and closed-off countries in the world, with zero tolerance towards any form of dissent. This is enforced by a collective punishment system, where 3 generations of a person's family are sent to a political prison camp for the infraction of a single person. The result is that there is not a single known human rights advocate or activist inside the country. There is no North Korean Aung San Suu Kyi or Liu Xiaobo. However, despite this, when we look at the lives of the ordinary North Korean people, change is happening at the grassroots level, and this gives us hope. In fact, from North Korean refugees that our organization has helped to bring safely to countries like South Korea and the United States, we constantly hear about a remarkable amount of change in North Korean society over the past 12 to 15 years. These grassroots changes were triggered by the collapse of the state socialist economy in the 1990s, which led to a famine that killed up to 1 million North Korean people. But out of that tragedy emerged the survival mechanism of grassroots marketization. And through these markets, people began providing for themselves and others with food and goods that the government could not provide. Today, these markets have become a fundamental part of life for the North Korean people and are gradually transforming North Korean society from below, creating spaces outside of the regime's complete control. And we believe that the quiet growth of these social change phenomena will eventually lead to a transformation of North Korea. In fact, we've identified 6 reasons why we believe the North Korean people will achieve their liberty in our lifetime. First, if we look at the long-term picture, there's a simple truth that the North Korea's current system is not creating any economic development. Over the past 50 years, South Korea has gone from being one of the poorest countries in the world to now being on par with an average EU nation. The difference between North and South Korea's economies is already the biggest of any 2 neighboring countries in the world. As little as 30 years ago, China was poorer than North Korea. Now, North Koreans look across the river at China and are amazed at the bright lights and the development that they see there. This is the result of the North Korean regime's absolute prioritization of political control. Their obsessive attempts to micromanage society has stifled the people's potential, effectively enforcing poverty on the population. But as the rest of the region races ahead, the regime's strategy of trying to deny change becomes increasingly untenable. especially as the divergence becomes increasingly obvious to the people. This leads to the second factor. The regime has traditionally put massive effort into isolating its people from the outside world so that they could determine the narrative that the North Korean people would believe through extreme indoctrination. The state attempts to control behavior by maintaining a monopoly as the only source of information and ideas inside the country. So there is no internet access for anyone in the country but a select group of officials and elites. And every TV station and newspaper is merely a mouthpiece for the regime. But this information blockade is crumbling, and more refugees tell us about watching South Korean dramas and Hollywood movies that are being smuggled in illegally on DVDs and USBs, and are even making direct contact with their relatives in South Korea through illegal Chinese mobile phones that are used in the border region. Despite the regime's best efforts, these information flows will only continue to grow, and as they do, the regime's narrative about their country and the outside world will become increasingly hollow and powerless. A third crucial but little-known reason for the regime's decreasing power over grassroots society is the explosion of corruption that's happened inside of the country since the economic collapse of the 1990s. The regime is essentially broke, and they cannot provide a budget to most government agencies, and they cannot afford to give proper wages to officials. With the emergence of market activities and new routes to private wealth, this makes corruption inevitable. North Koreans consistently tell us that in order to get ahead, or even just to survive in North Korea, you have to break the regime's rules, and that money enables all of those rules to be broken. Corruption is therefore steadily eroding the regime's control and authority over society. Fourth, there are tens of thousands of North Koreans that have illegally escaped and have resettled in countries like South Korea and the US, and thousands more are leaving every year. These defectors are playing a crucial role in accelerating change by serving as a bridge back into North Korea. It is estimated that 50% of these defectors keep in touch with their families who are still inside of the country through illicit channels and those illegal Chinese cell phones. This provides a channel for information to go back in about the outside world, which is then spread around by word of mouth. And perhaps more importantly, defectors are also sending money through broker networks to their families inside of the country. It's estimated that $10 to $15 million is being sent back each year, which is fueling this grassroots economy. This money enables family members to bribe security officials, protect their families, or even invest in illicit businesses or smuggling activities. This bridge role that defectors are playing has the effect of speeding up the erosion of regime power and increasing the bottom-up forces for change. Fifth, there is a quiet demographic revolution happening in North Korea. North Koreans born in the 1980s and the 1990s never knew the days under Kim Il-sung when the regime was actually able to provide for the public, and the people had little reason to doubt the state's ideology. Many of the refugees that we work with are actually part of this so-called Jangmadang, or market generation, and it's very apparent that they have a different psychological relationship with the state and the regime. They don't care much about Japanese colonization or the Korean War, and socialist ideology is increasingly irrelevant to them. They grew up in an era of marketization and self-interest where the regime merely seemed like an obstruction. Their natural youthful curiosity and willingness to take risks also coincided with unprecedented access to illegal foreign media that hooked many of them on fascinating glimpses of alternative realities and possibilities. The regime's old methods of control through indoctrination and the micromanagement of society is seemingly counterproductive for some of these young North Koreans who are ahead of the curve. And it is only a matter of time before this generation makes up the majority of society. Lastly, a result of many of these changes is that the North Korean people are more connected to each other than ever before, and they depend on each other more than they do the regime. This is significant because historically, the state has relied on the isolation, atomization, and disempowerment of the North Korean people, instilling a culture of fear and distrust among the people. But as these social changes strengthen the bonds between the people, we have even heard of cases where those who are supposed to facilitate government crackdowns are instead helping to hide their neighbors' radios in order to protect them. The more mutual trust and dependence that there is, the more people are likely to engage in shared illegal behaviors like watching foreign media and even criticizing the regime to each other. Another new trend that has been reported to us by refugees. When the people feel more loyalty to each other than to the state and are more connected to each other, collective empowerment becomes possible, and the bottom-up pressure for change will become a force to be reckoned with. The result of these grassroots change phenomena is that people are breaking away from the state, both physically and psychologically. The people used to look to the regime for food. Now they get it from the markets. State media was previously the only supplier of ideas and narrative, but this is now being broken down and replaced by new sources of information. The people previously felt that they owed their loyalty to the party and the leadership, but now they are steadily realizing that they can only depend on themselves and their fellow citizens. But this is still North Korea, one of the most repressive countries in the world. We don't expect North Korea to go through a radical change this year or even next. It is impossible to predict how North Korea is going to change and when. Perhaps the regime will see change coming and will proactively adapt and reform, or it may be that they will attempt to bunker down and will eventually be forced to change. What we can be sure of, though, is that these trends of people empowerment are here for the long term. They cannot be stopped, and they are irreversible. On a long enough timeline, history shows us that the survival rate of any government that denies the basic dignity of their people is 0. Our opportunity is to believe in the North Korean people and to pursue ways in which we can help them to accelerate change from the bottom up. For example, we can empower them through increasing the spread of new ideas and technologies, and even provide assistance to refugees so that they can fulfill their potential as agents of change. And if we do that, then we will see that people-driven progress, even in a country like North Korea, is not impossible. It will be inevitable. Thank you.